When David handed me that prenuptial agreement across our kitchen table, his confident smile told me everything I needed to know about what he thought our marriage would look like. He'd been my boyfriend for 2 years, and apparently, he'd spent those years calculating exactly how much of his wealth he needed to protect from me. "Look, Sarah, I know this might seem harsh, but my financial advisor insists on it," he said, sliding the thick document toward me with the same casual gesture he'd used to pass the salt. "You understand, right? I've worked hard to build my portfolio, and with the tech company doing so well, we need to be smart about these things." I stared down at the papers, fighting back the urge to laugh. David's tech company was a small startup that barely broke even most months, funded primarily by his father's connections. His portfolio consisted of a modest 401k and some cryptocurrency investments that fluctuated wildly. Meanwhile, he had no idea that the woman sitting across from him owned 3 luxury properties spanning from Malibu to Martha's Vineyard, with a net worth that would make his family's old money look like pocket change. "Of course, honey," I replied, keeping my voice steady and understanding. "I completely get it. Financial security is important." What David didn't know was that my marketing consultant job was actually a cover for my real career with the CIA. For the past 8 years, I'd been working deep cover operations that required me to maintain an entirely separate financial identity. The agency had set me up with a modest checking account and a basic credit history that matched my cover story perfectly. My real assets were hidden behind layers of shell companies and offshore trusts that even the most determined forensic accountant would struggle to uncover. The irony was delicious. Here was David, trying to protect his middling assets from someone who could buy his entire lifestyle without making a dent in her quarterly dividend payments. The Malibu house alone was worth more than his parents' estate in Connecticut, and I'd paid cash for it after a particularly successful operation in Eastern Europe. "I've marked the sections that apply to you," he continued, pointing to highlighted paragraphs with the enthusiasm of someone explaining a new board game. "Basically, what's mine stays mine, what's yours stays yours. Simple and clean." I nodded thoughtfully, pretending to read clauses about protecting his substantial business interests and family inheritance. The document was clearly drafted by someone who assumed I brought nothing to the table except my charming personality and perhaps some student loan debt. There were provisions about alimony limitations, property division, and even a clause about my potential claims to his future earnings and investments. "This seems very thorough," I said, setting the papers down gently. "Your lawyer certainly covered all the bases." David's chest puffed up with pride. "Harrison's the best in the business. He's handled prenups for some very wealthy families in our circle." Our circle. As if I'd been admitted to some exclusive club by virtue of agreeing to marry him. Little did he know that while he'd been playing small-town entrepreneur, I'd been building an empire that existed completely outside his comprehension. The truth was, I'd met David during one of my rare breaks between assignments. After 8 years of constantly shifting identities and living in the shadows, I craved something normal, something real. He represented everything I thought I wanted: stability, predictability, a life where I could just be Sarah the marketing consultant, instead of Agent Mitchell with 17 different passports and a kill count I preferred not to think about. David worked from a trendy co-working space in downtown Seattle, surrounded by other hopeful entrepreneurs who spent more time networking than actually building their businesses. His startup developed some kind of project management software that already had dozens of competitors, but he spoke about it with the passion of someone who'd invented the internet. I found his optimism endearing, even if his business acumen left much to be desired. What drew me to him initially was his complete ordinariness. After years of dating fellow operatives or carefully avoiding relationships altogether, David felt like a breath of fresh air. He worried about normal things like quarterly earnings and whether his lease would get renewed. He'd never killed anyone, never had to disappear in the middle of the night, never woken up in a cold sweat wondering if his cover had been blown. He was safe, uncomplicated, and blissfully unaware of the darker corners of the world I inhabited. Our relationship had been comfortable, predictable even. Weekend brunches, Netflix marathons, arguments about whose turn it was to do the dishes. For 2 years, I'd successfully maintained my cover while enjoying this slice of domestic normalcy. David knew I traveled frequently for work, consulting with various marketing firms across the country. He never questioned why I sometimes came home with a slight accent I hadn't left with, or why I occasionally woke up speaking German in my sleep. The engagement had been equally conventional. David proposed at our favorite restaurant with a ring that probably cost him 3 months' salary, though it was modest compared to the diamond earrings I'd acquired during a mission in Antwerp. I'd said yes, because I genuinely believed I could make this work, that I could somehow bridge the gap between my two lives. But sitting here with this prenuptial agreement, watching David protect assets that wouldn't cover the maintenance costs on my smallest property, I realized how naive I'd been. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about partnership, about the fundamental assumptions he'd made about who I was and what I brought to our relationship. The Malibu house had been my first major purchase, bought with earnings from a particularly lucrative extraction operation in Dubai. The Martha's Vineyard estate came after I'd successfully prevented an international incident in Prague. The third property, a stunning penthouse in Manhattan, was my reward for dismantling a human trafficking network that had taken me 18 months to infiltrate. Each property represented not just financial success, but survival, skill, and sacrifices David couldn't begin to imagine. While he'd been building PowerPoint presentations and attending networking mixers, I'd been building an empire one dangerous mission at a time. "So," David said, interrupting my thoughts, "when do you think you'll have time to review this with your lawyer?" I smiled, wondering what he'd say if he knew my lawyer was actually the CIA's top legal counsel. "Actually, David, I don't think I'll need a lawyer," I said, picking up the pen he'd so helpfully placed beside the document. "This looks straightforward enough." His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Really? Don't you want someone to explain the legal implications? Some of the language can be pretty complex." I almost laughed. Complex? I'd negotiated arms deals in 3 languages and memorized international maritime law for a single mission. But David's concern was touching in its condescension. "I'm sure you've covered everything important," I replied, flipping through the pages with practiced efficiency. Years of speed-reading classified documents had trained me to absorb legal text faster than most attorneys. Besides, I trust you. The look of relief that washed over his face was almost endearing. He'd probably been dreading weeks of back-and-forth negotiations, lawyer fees, and the possibility that I might actually have assets worth protecting. Poor David had no idea he was about to marry someone whose liquid assets alone exceeded his family's generational wealth. I was halfway through signing the document when my secure phone buzzed against my hip. The vibration pattern was unmistakable. Priority message, immediate response required. My handler only used that signal for time-sensitive operations. "Excuse me for just a second, honey," I said, standing up and moving toward the kitchen window. "Work call." David nodded absently, already pulling out his own phone to probably text his friends about how smoothly the prenup conversation had gone. If only he knew that my work call was likely about a situation that could impact global security. I glanced at the encrypted message. Package compromised. Immediate extraction required. Asset location, your vicinity. Stand by for coordinates. My blood ran cold. A compromised package meant one of our deep cover operatives was blown, and they needed emergency extraction. The fact that it was happening in my vicinity, Seattle, meant this wasn't coincidence. Someone had tracked an asset to my city, which meant there was a possibility my own cover could be at risk. "Sarah?" David's voice seemed to come from a million miles away. "Everything okay? You look pale." I turned back to him, my mind already shifting into operational mode, while my face maintained its concerned girlfriend expression. "Oh, it's just a client emergency. You know how these marketing campaigns can be. One little crisis and everyone panics." He nodded sympathetically, completely buying the cover story I'd perfected over 2 years. "Do you need to handle it now? We could finish this later." The irony hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, signing away rights to assets he didn't know I had, while potentially about to risk everything, including my carefully constructed normal life with him, for a mission that would remind me exactly why relationships and my career didn't mix. My phone buzzed again. Coordinates confirmed. The compromised asset was less than 5 miles from our apartment. Extraction window, 4 hours maximum. "Actually," I said, setting down the pen after signing the final page, "I think I do need to step out for a bit. This client situation is more serious than I thought." David beamed as he collected the signed prenup, completely oblivious to the fact that his new fiancée was about to disappear into the shadows of a world he couldn't imagine. "No problem at all. I'm just happy we got this sorted out so easily." If he only knew that the easy part was over, and the real complications were just beginning. As I grabbed my jacket and kissed David goodbye, my mind was already compartmentalizing. The loving fiancé who'd just signed away rights to millions was seamlessly transforming into Agent Mitchell, the operative who'd successfully completed 43 high-risk extractions without losing a single asset. "I'll probably be back late," I told him, forcing warmth into my voice while calculating travel time to the coordinates. "Don't wait up." David was already absorbed in his laptop, probably drafting an email to his lawyer about how smoothly everything had gone. He had no idea that his future wife was about to potentially blow her cover for a mission that could end everything we'd built together. The drive across Seattle gave me 23 minutes to prepare. The compromised asset was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a biochemist who'd been feeding us intelligence about a weapons development program for the past 18 months. According to the brief update on my secure phone, her handler in Mexico City had gone dark 3 days ago, and surveillance indicated hostile forces were closing in on her location. What made this extraction particularly dangerous was Dr. Vasquez's current cover. She was attending a biotechnology conference at the Seattle Convention Center, surrounded by hundreds of legitimate scientists and industry professionals. Pulling her out without causing a scene would require precision timing and flawless execution. I parked 6 blocks away and switched to my operational mindset completely. The Sarah who worried about wedding venues and argued with David about his mother's seating preferences ceased to exist. In her place was someone who could blend into any crowd, speak 5 languages fluently, and kill silently with improvised weapons if necessary. The convention center buzzed with afternoon activity. I'd memorized Dr. Vasquez's photo during the drive, but spotting her among hundreds of conference attendees wearing identical name badges proved challenging. My earpiece crackled with updates from our surveillance team positioned around the building's perimeter. "Target located, 3rd floor, East Wing," came the whispered report. "2 possibles maintaining visual contact. Recommend immediate action." 2 possibles meant hostile operatives were already in position. This extraction had just become exponentially more complicated. I couldn't simply walk up to Dr. Vasquez and escort her out. We'd both be dead before reaching the elevator. I found her at a display booth discussing molecular structures with genuine enthusiasm that almost made me forget she was living on borrowed time. The 2 men watching her from different angles were professionals. Their positioning was too perfect, their casual interest too studied. I recognized the type immediately: contract killers masquerading as conference attendees. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Hope your client crisis isn't too stressful. Love you." The message hit me like a physical blow. Here I was, potentially about to engage in lethal combat to save someone's life, while my fiancé sat at home believing I was handling a marketing emergency. The disconnect between my 2 worlds had never felt more jarring. Dr. Vasquez glanced up from her conversation, and our eyes met briefly. The flash of recognition was instantaneous. She'd been briefed on potential extraction scenarios and knew to watch for agency operatives. But in that same moment, I saw one of the hostiles reach inside his jacket. The extraction window was closing rapidly, and I had seconds to decide whether to blow my cover completely or watch an innocent woman die. David's prenuptial agreement was still warm in my purse, a reminder of the normal life I was about to sacrifice for duty. The hostile's hand emerged from his jacket with practiced precision, and I had maybe 3 seconds before Dr. Vasquez became a casualty. My normal life with David, the wedding we'd been planning, the comfortable lie I'd been living, all of it crystallized in that moment as I made the choice that would change everything. I moved through the crowd like water, using conference attendees as natural cover, while closing the distance to Dr. Vasquez. My fingers found the tactical pen in my jacket pocket, a seemingly innocent writing instrument that could puncture an artery in the right hands. Years of training kicked in as I calculated angles, exit routes, and collateral damage scenarios. The first hostile never saw me coming. I slipped behind him as he raised his weapon, driving the pen into the precise spot where his neck met his shoulder. He dropped silently, his gun clattering under a nearby display table. The sound was masked by the ambient noise of hundreds of conversations and presentation audio. Dr. Vasquez's eyes widened as she registered what was happening, but she had enough training to maintain her composure. I caught her arm gently, as if greeting an old colleague. "Dr. Martinez sends his regards," I whispered, using the code phrase that would confirm my identity. "He's waiting in the parking structure, level 3. She nodded almost imperceptibly, but the second hostile had noticed his partner's absence. I watched him scan the crowd, his hand moving toward his concealed weapon. We had maybe 30 seconds before he realized the situation had gone sideways. "Walk normally toward the east exit," I murmured to Dr. Vasquez. "Stop at every third booth. Act interested in the displays. I'll be 20 feet behind you." She was good, better than most assets I'd extracted. Her pace was unhurried, her interest in the scientific displays genuine enough to fool casual observation. But I could see the second hostile moving parallel to us, maintaining visual contact while speaking into what looked like a Bluetooth earpiece. My secure phone vibrated against my hip. David, probably wondering when I'd be home. The thought of him sitting in our kitchen, maybe ordering takeout from our favorite Thai place, felt surreal against the backdrop of this life-or-death situation. In a few hours, I'd either be debriefing at a safe house or dead in a convention center bathroom. The east exit was 50 feet away when everything went wrong. The second hostile broke protocol, abandoning subtlety as he pushed through the crowd directly toward Dr. Vasquez. Conference attendees scattered as he shoved past them, no longer caring about maintaining his cover. I had two choices: let him reach Dr. Vasquez and hope our extraction team could handle the fallout, or engage him directly in front of hundreds of witnesses with security cameras recording everything. Either option would likely end my career, but only one would definitely end Dr. Vasquez's life. The decision made itself. I intercepted him just as he reached for Dr. Vasquez, using his momentum against him to send him sprawling into a display of laboratory equipment. Glass shattered, alarms began blaring, and suddenly we were the center of attention for every person on the floor. "Run," I told Dr. Vasquez, abandoning all pretense of subtlety. "Level 3, northwest corner." She ran, and I prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that Agent Mitchell had just destroyed Sarah, the marketing consultant, forever. The hostile rolled to his feet faster than I'd anticipated, glass crunching under his boots as security personnel began converging on our location. Conference attendees pressed against walls and ducked behind displays, their academic discussions replaced by panicked whispers and the sharp sound of people calling 911. "Federal agent!" I shouted, hoping the lie would buy us precious seconds. My hand moved to the badge I always carried, a perfect replica that had fooled everyone from airport security to local police. "Everyone stay back!" The hostile's eyes narrowed as he processed this new information. He was calculating odds, weighing options, deciding whether a federal agent at a biotechnology conference was worth the international incident his employers would face. But his hand was already moving toward his weapon, and I knew he'd made his choice. I tackled him before he could draw, driving us both into another display booth. The impact sent scientific instruments flying, and I heard someone scream as we crashed through a poster presentation about gene therapy. My ribs connected hard with the corner of a metal table, sending sharp pain shooting through my torso. The hostile was stronger than he looked, his training evident in how he tried to pin my arms while reaching for what I now realized was a knife rather than a gun. Smart choice for a crowded venue. Quieter, less likely to cause mass panic. Unfortunately for him, knife fighting had been part of my curriculum since my second year with the agency. I twisted away from his grip, using the broken glass scattered around us to my advantage. A shard sliced across his forearm as he lunged forward, and his grip loosened just enough for me to break free. Blood was running down my own arm from cuts I hadn't noticed receiving, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. "Sarah?" The voice cut through the chaos like a blade to my heart. I turned to see David standing at the entrance to the convention floor, his face a mask of confusion and growing horror. He must have tracked my location using the phone app we'd installed months ago, probably worried about my client emergency. The hostile used my moment of distraction to his advantage, catching me across the jaw with a right hook that sent stars exploding across my vision. I stumbled backward, my carefully maintained cover story crumbling as David watched his marketing consultant fiancé engage in hand-to-hand combat with a professional killer. "David, get out of here!" I screamed, but he stood frozen, unable to process what he was seeing. The woman who'd signed his prenuptial agreement 3 hours ago was now bleeding, fighting, and clearly not the person he thought he'd been living with for 2 years. Security guards were shouting into radios, trying to establish some kind of perimeter while keeping panicked conference attendees from trampling each other. I could hear sirens in the distance. Real law enforcement was en route, which meant I had maybe 3 minutes before this situation became completely uncontainable. The hostile made another grab for his knife, but I was ready this time. Years of training took over as I caught his wrist, twisted hard, and heard the satisfying crack of bone breaking. He dropped the weapon with a scream that cut through the ambient chaos. But as I stood over his writhing form, catching my breath and trying to assess my injuries, I realized the real damage had already been done. David was still standing there, his face pale with shock, staring at the woman he'd planned to marry, like she was a complete stranger, because that's exactly what I was. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder as I stood there, blood trickling down my arm, staring at David's horrified expression. The hostile operative groaned at my feet, clutching his broken wrist, while conference attendees huddled behind overturned displays like survivors of a natural disaster. "Sarah, what the hell is happening?" David's voice cracked as he took a tentative step forward, his eyes darting between me and the man I'd just incapacitated. "Who are you?" Before I could answer, my earpiece crackled with urgent updates. "Asset secured. Extraction point compromised. Multiple law enforcement units converging on your location. You have 90 seconds to reach the alternate exit. 90 seconds to abandon everything I'd built with David, or stay and try to explain the unexplainable while risking both our lives." The choice should have been simple. The mission always came first. Personal attachments were a luxury operatives couldn't afford. But looking at David's face, seeing 2 years of shared memories crumbling in real time, I hesitated. "I can explain," I started, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. How do you explain to someone that your entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies? That the woman he'd fallen in love with was essentially a fictional character? Explain what? His voice rose above the chaos around us. Explain why you just beat the hell out of someone at a science conference? Explain why you're carrying what looks like a federal badge? Explain why you're covered in blood and acting like this is just another Tuesday? The sirens were getting closer, and I could see the first police officers entering the building through the main entrance. My secure phone buzzed insistently, probably my handler demanding to know why I wasn't already at the extraction point. Every second I delayed put Dr. Enmay Vasquez at greater risk, potentially compromised other ongoing operations, and violated every protocol I'd sworn to uphold. But David was still standing there, waiting for an answer that would make sense of the woman he thought he knew. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed hours earlier felt like a joke now. He'd been so worried about protecting his modest assets from someone who could have bought his entire world without thinking twice. Now he was learning that money was the least of the secrets I'd been keeping. "The person you fell in love with," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the approaching chaos. "She was real. My feelings for you, our relationship, what we had together, that was all real. But everything else," I gestured helplessly at the destruction around us, at the blood on my hands, at the federal badge clipped to my belt. "Everything else was a lie," he finished, his voice flat with the weight of realization. I wanted to deny it, to find some way to minimize the betrayal, but we were past the point of comfortable deceptions. Not a lie, just incomplete. The first police officers appeared at the far end of the convention floor, their voices sharp with authority as they began establishing a perimeter. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached us, 30 seconds to decide whether to disappear forever or stay and face the consequences of letting my two worlds collide. David's eyes met mine one last time, and I saw everything we'd built together die in that moment. "I'm sorry," I whispered, backing toward the emergency exit as police officers shouted commands across the convention floor. "I'm so sorry, David." His face crumpled with a pain that cut deeper than any physical wound I'd ever sustained. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Just don't." I ran. The extraction went flawlessly from an operational standpoint. Dr. Vasquez was safely delivered to our handlers. The hostile operative was taken into custody by local law enforcement under a fabricated terrorism charge, and within 6 hours, I was sitting in a sterile debriefing room, being congratulated on another successful mission. But success felt hollow when measured against what I'd lost. My handler, Director Walsh, reviewed the incident report with clinical detachment. "Your cover identity is completely blown, obviously. We'll need to relocate you immediately and establish new documentation. The Seattle operation is terminated effective immediately." I nodded numbly, still seeing David's face in my mind. "What about collateral damage? Civilian exposure?" "Minimal. Your fiancé has been contacted by our cleanup team. He's been briefed on national security implications and signed the appropriate non-disclosure agreements. He won't be a problem. Won't be a problem. As if David was just another loose end to be managed, rather than the man I'd planned to spend my life with. I wondered what they'd told him. What combination of threats and explanations had convinced him to stay quiet about what he'd witnessed. 3 weeks later, I was Agent Jennifer Hayes, living in a furnished apartment in Denver, with a new cover identity, as a freelance graphic designer. The agency had been generous with my relocation package, probably because the Seattle extraction had prevented an international incident, but money couldn't fill the David-shaped hole in my carefully reconstructed life. I'd kept one memento from my old life, the prenuptial agreement, still folded in my wallet like some kind of cruel joke. Sometimes I'd take it out and read David's careful annotations, remembering how concerned he'd been about protecting his modest assets from someone who owned 3 mansions. The irony wasn't funny anymore. My new apartment had a view of the Rocky Mountains, and I'd catch myself wondering what David would think of it. He'd always talked about wanting to go skiing in Colorado, back when we made plans for a future that would never happen. I'd bought the penthouse in cash, naturally, but there was no one to share it with. The agency offered me a promotion after Denver, a desk job coordinating operations instead of running them in the field. "You've earned it," Director Walsh said. 15 years of exemplary service, 44 successful extractions. Time to let the younger operatives take the risks. I accepted, partly because my reflexes weren't what they used to be, but mostly because I was tired of living lies. The new position came with a real identity, a legitimate background, and the freedom to form actual relationships without constantly calculating exit strategies. 6 months into my new life, I bought a small house in Virginia with a garden and room for the dog I'd always wanted but never been able to keep. It wasn't one of my mansions, but it felt more like home than any of those properties ever had. Sometimes I wondered if David ever thought about the woman he'd almost married, the one who'd signed away rights to millions while planning to risk everything for strangers. I hoped he'd found someone real, someone whose biggest secret was maybe a hidden shopping addiction or an embarrassing college nickname. As for me, I was finally learning to be just Jennifer Hayes. No cover story required.